Chicago winters don't knock on the door. They break it open. The cold finds every crack in the walls, slides under clothes, and settles inside bones like an old resentment that refuses to leave. I felt it the moment I stepped out of our apartment with Ava wrapped in my coat, her forehead warm against my shoulder despite the wind that clawed at both of us. Dawn hadn't arrived yet, only a bruised blue glow on the horizon. The street lamps flickered in tired halos as though even they didn't want to be awake. "Mommy, my cheeks hurt," Ava whispered, tucking her face against my neck. She was 5, small for her age, with big, thoughtful eyes that noticed everything, even the things I tried to hide. "Hold on, baby," I murmured, adjusting her weight and stepping off the curb toward the bus stop. "We'll get warm soon." I didn't know if that was true. The heating in our apartment had died 2 nights earlier, and the landlord responded to my message with the same thing he always said: "I'll check when I can." Translation: maybe next week, maybe never. But I didn't have time to be angry. I had a shift to reach, and shifts meant hours, and hours meant money even if it was barely enough to keep the lights on. The bus arrived groaning, its doors wheezing like an exhausted animal. A handful of workers, most of them black or Latino, nodded at me as I climbed aboard. We all rode this dawn bus, the survival route, as one driver once called it. No one spoke. We just swayed together in silence as the city blurred past us, its windows still dark, its secrets still asleep. When we reached North Star Foods, the plant loomed ahead, a blocky gray building where cold seeped out of the walls and into every fingertip. I kissed Ava's forehead gently before tucking her blanket tighter. "I'll drop you at Miss Carla's after the shift," I said, lifting her chin. "Okay?" She nodded, brave even though her nose was red and her eyes watery. "Okay, Mommy." Inside the plant, the air bit harder than the wind outside. I clocked in, placed my gloves on the workstation, and joined the packaging line. Steam rose from my breath as I worked. My fingers were already numb, but numbness was normal here. You learn to live inside it. "You're late," a voice barked. I didn't have to look to know it was Randall, the line manager. His gaze always landed on me first: black, female, temporary contract, single mother. 3 strikes before I even opened my mouth. "The buses were delayed," I said quietly. "Ava's running a fever." "Not my problem," he said. "And if you want that contract extension, you better quit the excuses." I gritted my teeth. I needed that extension. Every bill waiting in my kitchen drawer needed it. Every time Ava coughed in her sleep, I felt the weight of it. So I just nodded and went back to sealing frozen meal boxes until I couldn't feel where my hands ended and the cold began. Hours passed. By the time my shift ended, I was sure my bones were humming from the machine's vibration. Outside, snowflakes drifted in slow, mocking circles. I scooped Ava into my arms and headed toward the clinic. Her cheeks were flushed, and her breath sounded tight. At the clinic, the fluorescent lights made her skin look even paler. "It's likely viral," the doctor said, typing something into her computer without looking at me. "Fluids, rest, monitor the fever." "Thank you," I said, though the tightness in my throat made the word feel like it barely made it out. Outside the clinic, the wind sliced through my coat as I pulled Ava close and checked my phone. One new email. The subject line made my stomach drop. "Mandatory meeting, CEO Ethan Cole, tomorrow 9 a.m. I stared at the words until they blurred. CEO. Not HR. Not the plant manager. CEO. Nothing good ever starts with a meeting like that, especially for someone like me. Ava tugged on my sleeve. "Mommy? Yes, baby? Why do you look sad?" I forced a smile and brushed my thumb across her warm cheek. "Just tired." But the truth was louder than the wind. If I lost my job now, I would lose everything. The next morning, the city was a snow globe someone kept shaking. The wind howled between buildings, and every step felt like walking through wet sand. I didn't have anyone to call, not a babysitter, not a friend, not family. I had been alone with Ava since the day my fiancé vanished after I told him I was pregnant. His family blocked me. My parents told me I ruined my chances, and that adults clean up their own mistakes. I left home at 19 and never looked back. "Mommy, where are we going?" Ava asked, rubbing her eyes. "To an office building," I said, adjusting her little knit hat. "A very big one. Will they have hot chocolate?" Maybe. I lied. The North Star corporate tower stretched into the sky like it didn't care about the people standing under it. The glass reflected the storm so perfectly it felt like we were walking into a frozen version of ourselves. Inside, warm air rushed toward us, smelling like pine cleaner and expensive cologne. A receptionist glanced at Ava, then at me, then at my worn boots. Her smile tightened, but she said nothing. I have a meeting with Mr. Cole, I said, voice catching. The receptionist tapped on her monitor, then handed me a visitor badge without making eye contact. 11th floor. We reached the elevators. I set Ava on a cushioned bench near a wide hallway lined with framed photos of North Star's executive team smiling white faces in sleek suits. Sweetheart, you sit here, okay? I knelt in front of her. I'll be right across the hall. 5 minutes. Okay, she whispered, still holding her stuffed bear. Mr. Buttons, who had lost an eye last month but remained her fiercest protector. I smoothed her hair, stood, exhaled, and walked toward the restroom because I needed a minute to breathe before stepping into whatever waited behind the CEO's door. In the stall, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to contacts I hadn't called in years. Can I borrow a little? I whispered into one voicemail. I just need to make it to next month. Another call. Just until I get hours again. A pause. Then a gentle, I'm sorry, Maya, I can't. Third call. You're strong. You'll figure it out. I stared at the phone, at my reflection in the cracked mirror, eyes tired, lips trembling, hair pulled back in a way that said I'd stopped caring about pretty years ago. Tears slid down before I could stop them. I pressed both hands against the sink and let the silence swallow the sound my heart wanted to make. I wiped my face, fixed my coat, and walked back into the hallway. But when I turned the corner, my breath caught. Ava wasn't on the bench. I froze, every muscle locking into place until I spotted her small figure standing right in front of a door marked Ethan Cole, CEO. My heart slammed against my ribs. Ava. She knocked before I could reach her. The sound echoed like a gunshot. My feet wouldn't move fast enough. The door opened. Come in, a deep voice said. Then silence. I reached the doorway just in time to see my daughter, tiny and brave in her mustard yellow dress and pink coat, standing in the middle of a vast office. The man behind the desk, tall, sharp suit, expression carved from stone, slowly looked up from his screen. His eyes widened just slightly. Please don't fire my mommy, Ava said. Her voice was so soft I barely heard it over the hum of the heating vents. She works hard. She gives me her chicken soup. She walks in the snow even when her feet hurt. I felt the world tilt. Ava, I whispered, stepping inside. Sweetheart, come here. Ethan Cole lifted a hand, not unkindly, but firmly. Let her finish. His gaze didn't move from Ava's face. She took a hesitant step forward, holding out a crumpled piece of paper. I made this, she said. He knelt, slowly, the way people kneel when they're afraid to break something fragile. He unfolded the drawing. It showed a woman me standing under the harsh lights of a cold room, lines around her head showing stress. In the corner, behind thick scribbled lines, sat a tiny figure holding a worn, stuffed bear, alone, waiting. Ethan didn't blink, didn't move, didn't breathe. I saw something shift in his face, not pity, not confusion, something deeper. Recognition, a human recognizing another's quiet suffering. That scared me more than anger would have, because recognition means responsibility. And I had learned long ago that people with power hate feeling responsible for the powerless. Ava, I whispered, my voice cracking, come to mommy, baby. She looked at me, then back at him. Please don't fire her. She's all I have. And for the first time since I opened that email, I saw the CEO's expression soften barely, but enough for hope to slip its foot in before fear slammed the door shut again. People talk about silence like it's peaceful, but they've never stood in the kind of silence that swallowed that office after my daughter spoke. It wasn't calm, it was heavy, thick enough to press against my ribs and make breathing feel like disobedience. Ethan Cole remained kneeling, the crumpled drawing still in his hands, his eyes flicking between the image and the little girl who had dared to walk in and beg for her mother's job. Ava stood very still, like even the air might break if she moved too suddenly. I wanted to scoop her up, run out of the building, out of the city, out of every place where power could crush the two of us without effort. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, forcing my legs to move, each step feeling like wading through ice. "She must have wandered." "She didn't wander," he said quietly. His voice was low but held an edge that made my spine straighten. "Children don't wander into CEO offices. They walk with intention." Ava looked down at her boots, scuffing the carpet slightly. My heart clenched. I hated being seen like this, small, desperate, exposed. I held out my hand. "Sweetheart, come here. Mommy's not supposed to be in here long." But Ethan remained kneeling, his gaze locked on Ava with an intensity that was unreadable. Not cruel, not warm. Observing, calculating, searching for something. "Your name?" he asked softly. Ava hugged her bear tighter. "Ava, that's a beautiful name." His voice softened in a way that startled me. The man in front of me wasn't the ruthless executive I had imagined, the one who signed termination papers without blinking. There was something quieter in him, something buried. He rose to his feet, the drawing still held carefully between his fingers, as though it were something fragile rather than a crayon-scribbled page drawn by a child. He turned to me. For a moment, his gaze didn't feel like a threat or a verdict. It felt like the pause before a question. "Sit," he said, motioning to one of the chairs across from his desk. My throat tightened. Being dismissed was one thing, but being invited to sit, like I belonged in this room, was something else, something that made my hands shake more than anger or fear ever had. "Ava," he said gently, "would you like to sit with Miss Harper outside?" His assistant, who had appeared at the doorway with silent efficiency, stepped forward and offered her a warm smile. "I have crayons and apple juice." Ava looked at me for permission. I cupped her face gently. "It's okay, baby. I'll be right here." She nodded, whispering, "Don't let him be mean to you," before letting the assistant take her hand. Ethan's eyebrows twitched almost imperceptibly, as if the words had brushed against a nerve he didn't expect to have. The door closed, and suddenly, the quiet changed shape. Now it was only him and me. He walked behind his desk, set Ava's drawing down as if it were evidence in a delicate case, and opened a folder with my name printed neatly on the tab. "You've been working in packaging for 6 months, he said. "Temporary contract. Night shifts, mostly." "Yes, sir." My voice felt faint, like it might vanish if I didn't grip the armrest. "You've never been late," he continued. "Never called out unless pre-approved. Your supervisors describe you as efficient, quiet, compliant." The last word stung. Compliant. Like I was something trained, or tamed. "Your education," he said, flipping the page. 2 years of food science and marketing electives. High GPA. Academic scholarship. I stiffened. I didn't know that was even in my file. "Dropped out suddenly," he said. No record of why. Shame crept up my neck. "I was pregnant," I said, forcing the words out evenly. "My fiancé left. My parents didn't help. I had to choose between classes and feeding myself." "And your daughter," he said, glancing at the door. Not a question. A statement. "Yes." He nodded once, slowly, as though filing it away. "Your supervisors approved 5 improvement suggestions over the past 6 months. 3 were implemented without credit. Why didn't you follow up on that?" "People like me don't usually get credit," I said before I could stop myself. The honesty slipped out raw, unpolished. He leaned back, studying me with the kind of focus that made my pulse throb in my throat. "People like you," he repeated. "Black, temporary, single mother, working in the cold room." I stared at the carpet. "I didn't say that. You didn't need to." My hands curled into fists, palms damp. I hated this feeling, the tightrope walk between telling the truth and not sounding like I was asking for pity. "I'm not looking for sympathy," I said quietly. "Just a fair chance." His eyes flicked to the corner of the file where a small handwritten note was clipped. He pulled it free and held it up. My handwriting, my words. "I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm just asking for a real chance." He didn't speak for a moment. He just looked at the note, then at me, and something shifted around the edges of his expression. Not softening. Softening would have been too human, too accessible, but something aware, something burdened. "Why bring your daughter today?" he asked. The question wasn't cruel. It wasn't kind. It was a scalpel. I had no choice. There is always a choice. Not for me, I snapped, then immediately regretted the crack in my composure. I forced my voice lower. Not when her fever is back. Not when childcare costs more than rent. Not when the landlord ignores my calls. Not when I live 2 hours from anyone I used to know. Not when I'm trying to keep my head above water with $10 and hope that doesn't run out before payday. The silence after that was different. Heavy, but not suffocating. Observing, he closed the folder gently. I called you here because your contract is ending, he said. My breath stopped. Every nerve in my body stilled. But, he continued, I wanted to understand the person behind the performance reports. Behind the reports. Behind the statistics. Behind the cold. Is that why you let her speak? I asked, my voice barely a string. He gave the faintest hint of a frown. No child walks into a room like this unless she believes there's no other way. That told me more about your reality than any file could. The clock on the wall ticked. A slow, steady reminder that my future sat on the edge of one man's decision. He tapped the drawing Ava made with one finger. Does she always wait for you? My throat closed. Yes. Another pause. Then he stood abruptly, as if pushing back from something in himself he didn't want to sit with. You'll report to the 20th floor starting tomorrow, he said. I blinked. Sir? Temporary reassignment, he clarified. Family product innovation. You'll shadow the team and assist where needed. My breath scattered everywhere at once. I don't understand. Why me? He didn't look at me. His gaze stayed on the drawing. Because people who survive on $4 a day to feed a child tend to understand families better than people who analyze budgets from the comfort of a penthouse. My eyes burned. Not from humiliation. From something dangerously close to hope. That's all, he said, his voice tightening again into the clipped tone of someone building his walls back up. Miss Harper will bring your daughter back in. I stood, legs shaky, heart racing so fast I felt it in my palms. Thank you, I whispered. He didn't respond, but when I turned to leave, I caught him looking again at Ava's drawing, his expression unreadable except for one small truth that hung in the air between us. Something had shifted in him, and he didn't know what to do with it any more than I did. The door opened, and Ava rushed toward me, her little boots tapping against the polished floor. I picked her up, holding her tight, and as we stepped back into the hallway where everything smelled like pine cleaner and polished ambition, she whispered, Did he save your job, Mommy? I kissed her forehead gently. Maybe, I said. Maybe he saved more than that. The 20th floor didn't feel like the same company. It didn't even feel like the same universe. When the elevator doors opened the next morning with a soft chime, I half expected someone to step in and tell me I'd pressed the wrong button, that people who smelled like cold air and industrial soap belonged 12 floors down, not up here where the air carried hints of coffee and printer ink instead of disinfectant and frozen meat. I caught my reflection in the mirrored panel as the doors slid apart. Thrift store blazer pulled tight over my only decent blouse. Hair smoothed back as best I could manage with a cheap brush and a rushed morning, eyes trying to look more confident than they felt. Ava had squeezed my hand at the bus stop and whispered, You're going to the sky floors today. I'd laughed, but she wasn't wrong. Up here, everything was glass, light, and quiet voices, as if the building saved its softest sounds for the people who didn't work with their hands. I stepped onto the carpet, my boots sinking slightly into something too expensive to be called just a rug. Desks stretched out in clusters, each with double monitors and potted plants that looked like they'd never missed a watering schedule. Walls bore colorful charts of product lines, consumer segments, and something called Family Fusion, which I guessed was the new brand name for the meals we were trying to create. A woman with a sleek bob and a cream-colored blouse glanced up as I approached. Her nameplate read, Julia Harris, Senior Brand Strategist. She looked me up and down in a quick sweep that landed firmly on my shoes and stayed there for a second too long. Can I help you? She asked, in a tone that sounded like the answer she wanted was no. My fingers tightened around the binder HR had given me downstairs. I'm Maya Brooks, I said. I was told to report to Family Product Innovation. Temporary reassignment. She blinked, then leaned over to glance at her monitor. Oh, she said, the syllable drawn out like she'd just remembered an inconvenient appointment. Right. The Packaging transfer. There was something about the way she said packaging that made it sound like problem. You'll be shadowing the team, she continued, mostly assisting with consumer insights, basic documentation, that sort of thing. Okay, I said, even though my pulse pounded in my ears. Shadowing, assisting. I could do those things. Learn quietly, listen, pay attention. Those were survival skills long before they were work skills. Your desk is there. She gestured vaguely toward an empty workstation near the windows, slightly separate from the main cluster, like a spare chair pulled up to a full table. I nodded and walked over, aware of a few glances sliding in my direction before pretending to stare at screens. I set my binder down, placed my bag beneath the desk, and tried to ignore the way my hands shook as I logged into a computer that didn't freeze every 10 minutes. From where I sat, I could see the city stretch out below, snow-dusted rooftops and highways cutting through neighborhoods. Somewhere far beyond them, the plant squatted near the tracks, exhaling cold into the morning. Somewhere inside a small brick building, Ava was at school, drawing with broken crayons and telling anyone who would listen that her mom now worked up in the clouds. I opened the binder. Inside were product briefs, competitor analyses, charts of ingredients and sodium levels and target age groups. I recognized some of the technical language from my college days, words like macronutrients, sensory profile, parent purchase drivers. They rose up from the page like ghosts of a life I almost had. As the day unfolded, meetings blurred one into another. A junior manager named Priya walked me through the basics, how they tested new recipes, how they held focus groups with parents, how they tracked what kids actually ate versus what parents wanted them to eat. Kids say they love broccoli, she said dryly, but the trash cans tell a different story. I listened, absorbing everything, nodding, asking questions when it felt safe. I wrote until my fingers cramped. They spoke in acronyms and shorthand, a language that had once been mine but now felt like putting on an old jacket that didn't quite fit anymore. At lunch, the others gathered near the kitchenette, laughing softly over salads and catered sandwiches that cost more than what Ava and I spent on 3 dinners. I took my place at my desk with the lunch I'd packed. Leftover rice, beans, a few wilted greens. I ate quickly, scanning reports with one hand while using the other to scoop food into my mouth. Somewhere behind me, someone whispered, "Must be nice, getting plucked from the floor like that." And another replied, "Well, when the CEO takes an interest." The words slid into my back like cold needles. I kept chewing, kept writing, kept breathing. In the afternoon, there was a brainstorming session for Family Fusion, Phase 2. I sat near the end of the table, my notebook open, pen ready. Ideas flew. We should lean into global flavors. Parents want convenience but guilt-free ingredients. Maybe something plant-based? Nobody asked what the parents in my building wanted. They'd be happy with something that didn't break the food budget or leave their kids hungry an hour later. What about portion sizes? I heard myself say suddenly, the words out before I had time to question if they were welcome. Heads turned, a dozen pairs of eyes looked directly at me, and for a brief second I considered shrinking back into my chair and pretending I'd been talking to myself. But there was no safe way to rewind. "Go on," Priya said, leaning forward with a hint of curiosity. "A lot of the parents I know split meals between kids," I said. "They'll buy one frozen dinner and stretch it into 2 by adding rice or bread at home. What if we created a product that acknowledges that reality? Smaller compartments that let them customize portions without feeling like they're failing their kids because they can't afford 2 full meals." A man at the far end of the table, James, I thought his name was, raised an eyebrow. "Do we have data for that?" "We have stories," I said quietly. "We just don't always listen to them." The room grew still. For a moment, I thought I'd stepped too far, said too much. Then a voice from the doorway cut through the air, calm and measured. "Maybe we should start." Ethan stood just inside the conference room, one hand resting lightly on the frame, as if he'd been there longer than I realized. My chest tightened. I hadn't seen him since the day before, when he'd told me about this reassignment. Up close, in the light of day, he looked less like a figurehead and more like a man who'd forgotten how to sleep properly. Faint shadows under his eyes, a slight tension in his jaw. Miss Brooks understands something about stretching meals, he said, stepping inside. It would be a mistake not to take advantage of that perspective. The way he said my name, Brooks, not the transfer, not the packaging worker, sent a small ripple through the room. Some people exchanged glances. Priya gave me a tiny nod. James looked thoughtful instead of skeptical. Let's add her idea to the concept list, he said, and build a small research module around it. Done, Priya replied, jotting notes. I swallowed hard, adrenaline buzzing under my skin. I'd just thrown my reality onto their polished table, and instead of sliding it off into a trash can, someone had pinned it to the board. After the meeting, as people filtered out, I stayed behind to collect my notes, hands a little clumsy with relief and nerves. Ethan lingered near the window, staring out at the white-smeared skyline. I debated whether to slip out unnoticed, but his voice stopped me. How are you finding the 20th floor, Miss Brooks? I turned, clutching my notebook. Different, I said honestly. Less cold in some ways, more in others. One corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. You're adapting quickly. I'm trying not to drown, I replied before I could filter it. His gaze sharpened, not with disapproval, but with interest. You spent last night reading, he said. It wasn't a question. We can see the login activity. I felt heat rise to my cheeks. If that's not allowed, It's appreciated, he cut in. Just remember that fatigue is not a badge of honor. It's a debt your body will collect eventually. I almost laughed. With respect, Mr. Cole, my body has been collecting overdue bills since Ava was born. This is the first time it feels like I might be paying something off. He studied me for a moment, then nodded once, as if I'd confirmed something he suspected. If you hit a wall, he said, speak up. We have resources. You don't have to do everything alone. The words sounded rehearsed, like something he said to executives having burnout, not to a woman who had spent years cleaning offices at midnight. But there was something in his tone that didn't feel corporate, something that sounded almost like concern. I appreciate that, I said carefully, but I don't expect special treatment. I don't offer special treatment, he replied. I offer opportunities to people who prove they're willing to work for them. Then I'm in the right place, I said. His gaze dropped briefly to my notebook, where the pages were filled edge to edge with my small, tight handwriting. Then he turned and walked out, leaving behind the faint scent of coffee and a complicated silence. That night, after Ava fell asleep on our threadbare couch with a cartoon still playing softly in the background, I pulled my old college binder from the back of the closet. The rings creaked when I opened it. Notes on child nutrition, case studies about food deserts, articles about generational health in Black neighborhoods, all of it lived in those pages, like a life paused mid-sentence. I spread them across the small kitchen table, pushing aside the dish rack to make room. My second-hand laptop whirred to life. Its screen cracked in the corner and its battery too weak to last more than 20 minutes without the charger. I watched webinars until my eyes blurred, took notes until my fingers cramped, compared ingredient lists on North Star products with recipes I'd invented at home to make cheap food feel like something more than survival. Every so often, I glanced at the couch where Ava slept, curled around her one-eyed bear, the blanket rising and falling with each steady breath. We're going to make this count, I whispered into the quiet. We're not going backwards. At work the next day, the fatigue hit harder, but so did the focus. I caught mistakes on spreadsheets before others saw them, pointed out that a flavor profile pitched for toddlers had twice the recommended sodium, suggested swapping a picture of a perfect, spotless kitchen for something that looked more like the cramped, colorful chaos of the apartments I knew. Each time, someone paused, considered, nodded. Each time, the small knot of doubt inside me loosened just a little. Late in the afternoon, when my stomach growled loud enough to embarrass me and I was debating whether I could afford the vending machine, a paper cup slid into my peripheral vision, steaming gently. I looked up. Priya stood beside my desk smiling. Ginger tea, she said. Helps when you sleep less than you should but still insist on functioning. Thank you, I said, fingers curling around the unexpected warmth. How did you mentioned it in passing yesterday, she shrugged. Said ginger tea kept you awake during double shifts. I'm good at remembering details. Occupational hazard. She walked away before I could say anything else. Under the cup, carefully placed so I wouldn't miss it, was a small folded note. My heart rate picked up as I opened it, half expecting something sharp or patronizing. 4 words stared back at me instead, written in tight blue ink. Family first. Always. E. C. I traced the letters lightly with my thumb, feeling something unfamiliar settle low in my chest. Not safety. Not yet. But a shift. A promise. Maybe not that life would suddenly become easy, but that for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't just fighting against systems designed to forget me. Somewhere, on a floor high above the plant where I'd frozen my hands for months, someone with power had written down a sentence that aligned with the one that had been guiding me since the day I first held Ava in my arms. Family first. Always. I sipped the tea, let its heat spread through me, then turned back to my work not as the woman just grateful not to be fired, but as someone who was finally, cautiously, beginning to believe that a real chance might not be an accident, but the beginning of a new chapter I refused to waste. The storm didn't announce itself with thunder. It arrived quietly, like most disasters do through a notification banner on my screen. I was reviewing sodium charts for the toddler meals when my phone buzzed once, twice, then erupted in a vibrating panic that rattled the desk. At first I ignored it. People in the 20th floor had dozens of alerts every hour, and I'd learned not to flinch at everything that flashed. But then Priya's voice, usually calm and composed, sliced through the room. Oh God. Everyone, look at this. Screens lit up across the open office like a chain of controlled explosions. Headlines, reds, flash alerts. A picture of our product plastered beneath a horrifying caption. Northstar meal caused baby to break out in hives, says outraged mother. Another headline. Toddler vomits after eating new Northstar family fusion product. Investigation urged. My stomach turned to ice. Not the cold room kind of ice I'd lived with for months, but the kind that freezes your heartbeat, then cracks it. Priya clicked the article. A woman, white, mid-30s, well-dressed, held her baby up to the camera in a shaky video filmed in what looked like a pristine kitchen. Her voice trembled with practiced outrage as she described the unsafe meal that had supposedly harmed her child. Under the video, hundreds of comments flooded in, screaming, accusing, demanding heads roll. "This is bad," James muttered. "Really bad." I stared at the mother's face as she spoke. None of it added up. The lighting too perfect, the details too dramatic, the timing suspiciously aligned with our upcoming launch. But logic didn't matter. Fear always spreads faster than truth. Someone whispered, "Who worked on the recipe?" Another voice replied, "The new girl from packaging, right? That Brooks woman?" My hands went still on the keyboard. I felt the air shift, heavy with suspicion. It was the kind of suspicion I'd grown up with, the kind that clung to black women like humidity, quiet, sticky, impossible to wipe off even when you did nothing wrong. Within minutes, the entire 20th floor was summoned to the big conference room. I walked in last, feeling the weight of eyes tracking me even before I reached my seat. The long table was filled executives, managers, analysts, QA staff. Ethan was at the head, shoulders squared, expression unreadable. "We're not here to panic," he began, voice calm enough that it almost fooled me. Almost. "We're here to find the truth." Screens lit up behind him showing charts, timestamps, shipment records. QA explained there had been no flagged batches. Distribution confirmed no anomalies. Someone from legal said the mother's claims were highly concerning but still unverified. Then a question cut through the room like a blade. Who handled the initial formulation? The words weren't loud, but they carried. The air tensed. Slowly, as if choreographed, faces turned toward me. No accusation allowed, just looks. The kind that didn't need translation. Ethan didn't look at me. Not once. "Miss Brooks," QA said from across the table, "did you make any adjustments during your shadowing period? Anything that might not have been logged?" My mouth went dry. "No," I said. "I followed the protocol. Every change I suggested was documented and approved." "But you were new," someone said. "And sometimes new people misunderstand procedures. Or don't know what they don't know," another added. The room hummed with a kind of polite hostility. The kind where people smile as they push you off the cliff. I felt my jaw tighten. I kept my voice even, steady, because I'd learned long ago that the angrier the world expected black women to be, the calmer we had to speak to survive it. I didn't make any safety-related decisions without supervision, I said. And the batch in question wasn't part of my involvement. You can check the timestamps. My voice didn't shake, but my hands did beneath the table. The meeting dragged on. Data flew like bullets, shipping logs, QA reports, purchase histories, focus group transcripts, and all the while, the headlines flooded in faster than we could breathe. Number North Star fail, number unsafe for kids, number boycott North Star. When the meeting finally dispersed, people hurried out, eager to whisper in hallways where they thought I couldn't hear. I stayed behind, stacking my notes neatly, because it gave my hands something to do other than clench into fists. When I reached the door, Ethan spoke. "Miss Brooks." My spine stiffened. I turned slowly, one hand gripping my binder. The conference room was empty now except for him. Snow swirled outside the tall windows behind him, giving the whole room a quiet, sterile glow. "Stay a moment," he said. I walked back inside, each step heavy. He didn't sit, he didn't lean. He just looked at me with an expression so unreadable it was almost cruel in its neutrality. "Tell me the truth," he said. My pulse hammered. "I have. Could this be a mistake on your part?" The words were a whisper, but the impact was the kind that knocks the air out of your lungs. My heart didn't just drop, it bottomed out completely. "You think I could do something that would put children at risk?" I asked, barely able to push the sounds out. "After everything I've told you about Ava? About how careful I am with every ingredient, every detail, after watching me work day and night?" "I have to ask," he said quietly. "This affects the board, our investors, the public. So you're asking me if I'm the cause. I'm asking you if it's possible." There it was, not shouted, not angry, but devastating. Trust not withdrawn but suspended over my head like a verdict waiting for evidence. Something inside me hollowed out. I thought of Ava's drawing sitting somewhere on his desk, the tiny version of her waiting behind dark scribbled walls, the real version of her waiting at school, trusting me to fight for us. "No," I said finally. "It isn't possible. Not in the way you're imagining. Not even close." His jaw tightened. Not disbelief exactly. Something murkier. Something bordering on fear, fear of choosing wrong, fear of defending the wrong person, fear of consequences that didn't fit neatly in spreadsheets. "I see," he said. 2 words. Ice. Cold. Final. There was nothing left to say. I left the room without waiting for dismissal. My footsteps echoed down the hall, a hollow sound against polished floors that suddenly felt too smooth to grip, too pristine to belong to someone like me. The next morning, HR emailed me. "Pending review. You are temporarily suspended from product involvement. You may continue general office duties as reassigned." Translation: "We're not firing you yet, but we're getting close." People didn't speak to me the same way. Before, some had smiled politely, others nodded. A few even softened when speaking to me. Now conversations halted when I entered the room. Whispers sprouted in corners like mold. Words like liability, oversight, rushed, floated in the air. Someone even said, "Well, she wasn't trained properly," as if that excused their eagerness to pin this on the most disposable person in the building. I worked quietly, mechanically, filing data nobody cared about, typing notes nobody would read. A ghost in a glass tower. When my shift ended, I didn't take the elevator down immediately. I went to the restroom, closed myself inside the far stall, and let my body lean against the cold tiled wall. I didn't sob, not loudly. The tears came soundlessly, the way they do when you're afraid of being heard, afraid of being seen, afraid of confirming every stereotype people are ready to project onto you. I pressed my hand over my mouth until the shaking stopped. Then I wiped my face, retied my hair, straightened my thrift store blazer, and walked out like a woman whose world wasn't falling apart. Because falling apart is a luxury, and life hadn't afforded me that in years. On the bus ride home, I watched snow smear across the windows in streaks of white and gray. The city blurred brick buildings, storefronts, flickering traffic lights, the quiet ache of neighborhoods where struggle lived like a permanent tenant. Ava leaned against me, her warm cheek soft against my arm. "Mommy?" she murmured. "Yes, baby? You're sad. I forced a smile. Just tired. Your heart feels tired, she said, with the strange, knowing seriousness only children have. I kissed her forehead because I didn't know how to answer. But as I watched the snow drift across the city, something hardened quietly inside me, not anger, not desperation, but resolve. If no one else would fight for the truth, then I'd do it myself, not with shouting, not with rage, but with the quiet, relentless persistence that had kept me alive this long. If they were waiting for me to crumble, they were going to wait a long time, because dignity isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It survives in silence, in small steps, in a mother's decision to rise again tomorrow. Even if the world was preparing to bury me, I wasn't finished yet. The morning after my suspension felt like stepping into a different world, one where the air was heavier and every sound echoed a little too loudly. I woke before dawn, not because my alarm rang, but because worry had curled itself into my ribs and squeezed until breathing felt like labor. Ava slept beside me, small and warm under the thin blanket, her curls spread across the pillow like a promise life hadn't broken yet. I brushed my fingers through her hair and whispered, "We're going to fix this, baby." It wasn't reassurance, it was a vow. When I got her ready for school, her tiny backpack dangling off her shoulder, she looked at me with those quiet, searching eyes. "Are they still being mean to you at your work?" she asked softly. "I'm fixing it," I said, smoothing her scarf. "I don't know how yet, but I will." Those words stayed with me long after I kissed her goodbye at the school's front door and stepped back into the biting Chicago wind. I had nowhere to go, no meeting to attend, no team waiting for my notes. But I had work to do, not the kind they assigned me, the kind that would save me. And maybe save North Star too, though that felt like an afterthought compared to keeping a roof over Ava's head. My first stop was a small market near our apartment, the kind with fluorescent lights that buzzed slightly and shelves packed tight with discount brands. I introduced myself to the owner, an older black woman with a soft voice and tired eyes, explained the scandal, and asked if any customers had bought the toddler meal. She shook her head slowly. "Not in my store," she said. "Parents around here stretch every dollar. They know what's in the food they buy." She filled out my survey anyway. 1 down, 19 more before the afternoon. I spent the next hours stopping strangers near laundromats, daycares, community centers, anywhere parents might pass by. Most people ignored me. A few stopped. Some gave me strange looks, others sympathetic ones. A couple women flat out refused. One mother, carrying a toddler on her hip, listened patiently to my pitch and said, "Honey, that scandal looks fake. Don't let them pin it on you. These companies always want one person to blame." Her kindness almost broke me, but I swallowed the ache and kept collecting her answers. By noon, my fingers were numb from the cold. The wind picked up, slicing through my coat until I felt it in my bones. Snow turned to sleet, tapping against my hood with sharp little pinpricks. I whispered a quick prayer that Ava was warm in her classroom because I wasn't sure how long I could stay warm out here. But quitting wasn't an option. You don't quit when your child depends on you. You don't quit when the world has already decided you're disposable. You don't quit because dignity has nothing to do with applause or witnesses. It's something you carry even when no one sees it. By late afternoon, I had 12 completed surveys, my shoes soaked through, and my legs aching from walking block after block. That was when I reached the edge of a gated neighborhood, a place so clean and orderly it looked like a different city entirely. The guard at the front gate stepped forward immediately. "Ma'am, you can't stand here." "I just need 5 minutes," I said, holding up my clipboard. "There are families inside who might have tried the product." "Not allowed," he cut in, already signaling me to step back. I stood just outside the gate, sleet collecting on my eyelashes, feet sinking slightly into slush as I waited. He kept glancing at me like he hoped I'd give up and walk away. A few cars passed. A delivery van entered. A couple jogged through with matching neon jackets. Finally, the guard approached again, frustration tightening his voice. "Seriously, lady, you need to leave." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, a woman pushing a stroller rounded the corner and stopped mid-step. She stared at me with a look of recognition so sudden it made my breath catch. "Are you the woman from the videos?" she asked softly. "The one studying the meals? The one they said might have made a mistake?" Shame burned up my neck like a fever. "Yes," I whispered. "But I didn't. I swear I didn't." She looked at my soaked coat, my frozen hands, the stack of surveys. Then she turned to the guard. "She can come in with me." Before he could protest, she waved me forward. "Come on," she said gently. My throat tightened as I followed her inside. She filled out the survey inside her warm foyer while her toddler babbled beside us. When she handed it back, her eyes softened. "For what it's worth," she said, "I don't believe the rumor." I thanked her, blinking back tears I refused to let fall. I wasn't crying in some stranger's house. I wasn't crying today at all, not until Ava was asleep and the lights were off, if I had any tears left at all. Outside, the sleet had turned to full rain now, heavy enough to blur the edges of the world. Street lamps glowed in soft halos, cars splashed through puddles, and the sidewalks shimmered like sheets of glass. I checked my watch. 5 surveys left. I would finish them, no matter how long it took. I headed toward a busy intersection, where I knew parents sometimes passed after work. Rain soaked through my hood, down my collar, into the seams of my pockets. My jeans clung to my legs, cold and heavy. I raised the clipboard and approached a woman pushing a stroller. "Ma'am, could you spare a few minutes?" She didn't stop. Another person didn't even slow down. A third shook her head without looking at me. I felt my hope slipping like water between my fingers, but I kept moving, kept asking, kept trying, until, as I stepped off the curb to cross toward another cluster of people, a sudden horn blared. Bright headlights flashed in the rain. A motorcycle, too fast, too close. I froze. My body wouldn't respond. I didn't scream, didn't jump, just stood there, drenched and stunned by the speed of panic. And then someone grabbed my arm and yanked me back hard enough that I stumbled into a solid chest. My clipboard flew from my hands, papers scattering across the wet pavement like frightened birds. I gasped, heart pounding so violently it hurt. "Maya." His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the storm like a blade. I looked up, rain dripping into my eyes. Ethan, standing in the downpour, coat soaked through, hair plastered to his forehead, breathing hard as though he'd run blocks to get here. For a long moment we just stood there, me gulping air, him gripping my elbow, both of us drenched to the bone. "What?" I finally managed. "Are you doing here?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped away just enough to crouch down and start picking up the ruined survey sheets floating in puddles. I stared at him, stunned. He gathered what he could, shaking water off the pages. Then he reached into my bag, pulled out a few still dry surveys, and stood beside me. He turned to a passerby, a tired-looking father carrying a grocery bag. "Hi," Ethan said, voice steady. "We're collecting feedback on a children's food product. Just a quick survey." The man blinked, glanced between us, soaked black woman, immaculate white CEO soaked to match, and slowly nodded. He filled out the form under the awning of a closed butcher shop. Ethan thanked him. I stood frozen. "You're here," I whispered, still trying to make sense of it. "Why are you here?" He finally looked at me. Rain clung to his lashes. His jaw twitched like he was wrestling words he wasn't used to saying. "Because I started investigating the claim the moment it surfaced," he said. "And the woman who made the video, she's a former employee of a competitor. Paid to lie. None of it is real." The world tilted. The rain softened in my ears until I heard only my heartbeat. "You're serious?" "I have proof," he said. "Legal is preparing a statement." Relief hit me so sharply I staggered. But another feeling, deeper, sharper, pulsed beneath it. "Then why?" I said, my voice cracking. "Did you ask me if I made a mistake?" The rain between us felt louder suddenly. Ethan looked down, breathing slow and uneven. "Because I didn't doubt you," he said. "I doubted myself. I doubted whether I had the strength to defend you if everything went wrong." My throat tightened. "So you kept your distance. And it hurt you," he said. "I know that. I see it now." A gust of wind blew rain sideways, pushing us toward the shelter of the bookstore awning. We stepped beneath it, water dripping in silver threads from the edge of the roof. I leaned back against the brick wall because my knees felt weak. Ethan stood close, not touching, but near enough that I felt the heat of him through the cold. "I asked the wrong question, Maya," he said quietly. I shouldn't have asked if you made a mistake. I should have asked. He swallowed. If you wanted me to stand with you. Something inside me tight, bruised, guarded shifted. I didn't forgive him. Not yet. But the crack was there. The beginning of something I wasn't sure I had space for, but couldn't ignore. He looked at the ruined surveys in his hand, then at me. From now on, he said, voice steady, I'm here, and I won't let anyone put a question mark after the word trust again. The street was still soaked, puddles reflecting headlights like fractured stars. People rushed past without looking at us, two drenched figures under a flickering awning, caught in a moment that didn't belong to anyone else. I let out a long breath, one that felt like it carried months of exhaustion and fear. Okay, I whispered. Not forgiveness, not surrender, just an opening, a beginning. Ethan nodded once, as if sealing a promise he didn't intend to break. And together, we stepped back into the rain, gathering the last of the scattered papers as if the storm hadn't almost taken everything from me but had somehow, impossibly, given something back. The morning after the storm didn't feel like victory. It felt like the quiet breath before a verdict. Snow dusted the sidewalks, light and soft, covering the city like a thin promise that maybe, just maybe, the worst had passed. I walked Ava to school with her mittened hand wrapped around my fingers, her boots stamping tiny prints beside mine. She hummed to herself, a little off-key, but her voice had a brightness I hadn't heard in weeks. Mommy, she said, stopping in front of the school steps. You're not sad today. I crouched to fix her scarf. Why do you think that, baby? Because your eyes aren't heavy, she said simply, as if she were reporting the weather. I kissed her forehead and whispered, Go shine today, and she ran toward her classroom door, turning once to wave. I waved back, the cold stinging my cheeks, but not enough to drown the warmth spreading in my chest. When she disappeared inside, I turned toward the bus stop only for my phone to buzz with an alert that made my breath catch. Breaking. North Star scandal exposed as fabrication. CEO announces targeted smear campaign. Beneath it a picture of me. Not in a studio. Not in good lighting. Not posed. Just me in the rain. Hood half fallen. Hair soaked. Clutching my clipboard like a lifeline while headlights blurred behind me. The caption, The woman who wouldn't let the truth drown. My hand trembled. Not out of fear. Out of something deeper. Recognition. For the first time, the world wasn't looking at me as a suspect. They were seeing the battle I fought in silence. The bus ride to North Star felt surreal. People glanced at me for a second too long, though I couldn't tell if it was curiosity or sympathy. When I stepped off near the tower, reporters clustered around the entrance, their breath creating small clouds in the cold. Cameras flashed as soon as someone shouted, That's her, the developer who went into the storm. I froze, but security ushered me through quickly. The lobby was warm, buzzing, alive. Employees whispered, but the tone had shifted. Not suspicion, not pity. Something like respect, even if they didn't know how to wear it yet. The elevator doors closed around me with a soft hiss, and I let myself breathe. On the 20th floor, the atmosphere crackled with tension. People darted in and out of offices, clutching folders, phones pressed to ears. When I walked in, conversations faltered. Heads turned. Priya rushed over first. Maya, she said, eyes shining. You did it. Your surveys, your evidence legal confirmed everything. The board's meeting right now. Ethan, she stopped as the conference room door swung open and several executives hurried out. Ethan followed, his tie slightly loosened, his expression focused but no longer storm-tight. When he saw me, he paused. For a moment, the world around us blurred like the edges of that rainy photograph. Miss Brooks, he said, stepping toward me. We're about to hold a company-wide announcement. Come with me. I followed him into the largest conference space, a glass-walled room overlooking the city. Screens were set up, lights were arranged. Reporters waited outside. Employees filled the rows of chairs. My heart thudded as he gestured for me to stand beside him. Are you sure? I whispered. This is your company. He shook his head faintly. And your truth. The room quieted. Cameras powered on. The red recording lights blinked. Ethan stepped to the podium. Thank you all for coming, he began, voice steady. Yesterday, North Star Foods became the target of a deliberate and malicious smear campaign orchestrated by a former employee of a competing firm. Screens behind him showed documents, timestamps, message logs, undeniable proof. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "But today," he said, "I want to talk about someone else." My throat tightened as he turned ever so slightly toward me, a woman who refused to let lies drown her integrity, who stood in the rain, alone, gathering truth one voice at a time, who refused to crumble even when I failed to stand beside her. All eyes shifted to me. I swallowed hard, heat rising to my face. "Her name is Maya Brooks," he continued, "and this company owes her not only an apology, but its gratitude." A hush fell so deep I could hear my heartbeat. "She symbolizes what family means in this industry," Ethan said. "Not the marketing term, the real meaning, the communities we serve, the parents we feed, the children who deserve better food and a better world." He stepped back, giving me space at the podium. My legs felt unsteady, but I moved forward because Ava would have wanted me to. Because the little girl inside me who once believed dreams were only for people in warm houses with two parents needed to hear me speak. I cleared my throat. "I'm not someone who usually stands in rooms like this," I began. "I'm a mother who's learned to stretch $10 into dinner for two. A woman who's walked to work in the snow because the bus didn't come. Someone who's been told, 'You don't belong here' in 100 different ways without anyone saying the words." A few people lowered their eyes. "But I do belong here," I said softly, "because families like mine exist, and our needs matter, and our voices matter, and the food on our tables matters." The room was silent, not cold, not judgmental. Listening. For the first time, truly listening. After the conference ended, reporters swarmed, employees clapped softly, and some reached out just to say, "Thank you." Priya hugged me, warm and tight. James nodded respectfully, the skepticism in his eyes replaced with something like admiration. But it was outside on the sidewalk, where snow had begun to drift again, that the moment sank in. Ava barreled toward me, pink coat unzipped, her face glowing. "Mommy," she squealed, throwing her arms around my waist. "You were on TV, my teacher said you're a hero." I laughed, tears pricking my eyes. "I'm just your mom, baby." "That's even better," she said, burying her face in my jacket. Ethan stepped out of the building, coat buttoned, breath forming small clouds. He approached slowly, respectfully, stopping a few feet away. "Miss Brooks," he said, voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "The board approved something this afternoon." I raised an eyebrow. Should I brace myself? "I hope not," he said, "because they approved your promotion." My breath hitched. "Promotion? Director of Community and Family Product Development," he said. "Your role, your team, your vision." My knees almost gave out. "Ethan, I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything yet," he replied. "Just take the chance you asked for. A real one this time." Ava peeked at him from behind my coat. "Are you going to be nice to Mommy now?" she asked. Ethan crouched slightly to meet her gaze. "Every day," he said quietly. Her eyes softened, and she reached out to take his gloved hand. He didn't flinch. Snowflakes drifted between us, soft and glowing under the streetlight. Ava squeezed both our hands. "So," she whispered, looking up at us with the kind of innocence that breaks you open, "do we have a family now?" Ethan looked at me, not at my clothes, not at my past, but at me, at everything we had survived. "We always did," he said. "We just needed to walk through the storm to see it." We stood there, 3 silhouettes under falling snow, bound not by blood, but by truth, trust, and the quiet victories that don't need applause to be real. And for the first time in my life, I felt not invisible, not tolerated, not surviving, just home. If this story touched you, if you've ever fought battles in silence or carried your family through storms no one else could see, I hope you'll stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel so these stories of resilience, dignity, and second chances can reach others who need them. Thank you for walking this journey with us. Our next story awaits.